Welcome to this week's episode of Mind Your Real Estate Business. We have David Ferris back in the studio this time. This is I think this is the first time that I've had somebody actually here in person. It's always been virtual, so welcome, David.
Yeah, excited to be here.
So David is now going on 5 years in the business and actually joined my team right out of the gate. And, over the last 5 years has evolved into an accomplished realtor. And also, more recently, in the last year, has become my business partner. So I've gone from whipping boy to the who whips.
Yeah.
This week, I thought it was really quite a timely opportunity for us to be together on this call, because I think that there's a lot of agents that are looking for ways to do more business, to attract more business, to sell the product that they have. So we wanted to, this morning, actually, we were talking about off-market opportunities, pros and cons, and specifically, I guess, why don't we start with buyers, talk about buyers. What's the advantage if you're a buyer, to go and have like a list of off-market listings that you can pick from?
Well, the obvious thing is, depending on the product you're looking for, anything but condos pretty much. Inventory can be limited depending on the time of year and, again, the product that you're after. So being able to present people with opportunities that otherwise might not exist on MLS is very beneficial. And then, of course, potentially you eliminate competition, right?
So, I think that could be perceived as a pretty significant negative if you're the seller. And actually, I think we've come across a number of people that were skeptical of the off-market deal because they're like, how do I know that I'm not leaving money on the table?
Yeah, I think there's skepticism in our industry on a lot of things, right? So I think when we present off-market opportunities to buyers, there's skepticism there. Well, why would they want to sell off-market is usually the first thing that they say, right?
Yeah.
Which may be a simple way to segue into what the benefits are for those sellers who may want to sell off-market.
Yeah, I think, as we go into that, I think the first thing is, this is not an easy process. Like looking for off-market anything, and it does require more work.
Yep.
I always recommend, like, for agents that are feeling like they need to fill the pipeline, they need some more immediate sort of deals, go and look for those off-market opportunities. Like, use this as like a prospecting tool. And if you can play matchmaker, great.
Yep.
And definitely, I think the other thing is don't fabricate a buyer to solicit a listing. I think that's lots of people do that, and there's a difference between looking for off-market listings versus I have a buyer in your name.
It always, yeah. I mean, we've all got those letters dropped in our mailbox, right? I think it comes back to honesty and integrity. If you want to have a long-term business that's going to be sustainable, you're always going to be much better off to be honest and have some integrity with your business.
Right. So, we were talking about, like, what's the benefit? Like, what kind of seller wants to sell off market? And I do think that there's a number of different situations. The one that came up for me, one of the first ones, was somebody that just, he'd actually lost his wife some years before, and really didn't want to go through the process of emptying out the house, painting the whole place, staging it, presenting it in a way that would have got him top dollar, wanting to avoid that whole process. And he was willing to potentially leave a little bit on the table. And interestingly, that negotiation took 3-4 days of back and forth between the buyer and the seller, and to reach a place where both parties were happy. And ultimately, I think that we probably found what the market value was for the property. I don't think that either party really was disadvantaged or advantaged in either sort of way. So that's one. Like, that's one type of person. Who else do you think would be a motivated off-market seller?
I think upsizers can be someone who maybe has 2 or 3 kids, a busy lifestyle, a lot of clutter, all those things that come with people who want to upsize. Typically, they're in a smaller house with clutter, lots of kids running around. Maybe they don't want to go through that whole process of being displaced, having to declutter and stage and go away for a weekend to facilitate open houses and all those things. And also, if they are able to, play matchmaker and sell their property, they may have the buyer may be more flexible as far as closing time.
That's, I think, the big one is that flexibility and maybe your ability to be able to tie it up while you go and shop for the other property. Like maybe you could have a very long conditional period. There's a lot more that we can do from a negotiating perspective because the property has not been exposed to MLS. So you're not really like by having a long conditional period, you're not missing any other opportunities by having it tied up conditionally. If the deal were to fall through, you still have MLS as backup where you can go there should the deal not come together.
Yep, for sure. I think I have one more that I just thought of right now. Be potentially somebody who's trying to sell a condo in this market. Instead of listing the condo, exposing potentially your pricing, having it sit on the market for an extended period of time, and the negative things that come with that, if they are able to do something off market, it might be beneficial for them.
Yeah. And so this kind of gets to the point where, you sort of ask yourself as a real estate agent, how does this benefit the buyers specifically? Like we talk about the sellers and where their advantages are. Some of the buyer advantages are obvious, like you get to see something that nobody else has seen.
Yeah.
But what are some of the other buyer advantages that you can see here for something that's off market?
Yeah, the obvious ones are they're seeing a product that no one else is seeing, no competition in certain areas of the city right now. Obviously, we're seeing multiple offers and a lot of competition for certain properties. Those are the two obvious ones.
I always kind of think like from the agent's perspective too, I think it's important to put out there that I think that as agents, we could do much more from a collaborative perspective. It's I think one of the big advantages of being at Remax Hallmark and having, 2,000 agents within the brokerage that are, for the most part, I think pretty sharing. Like there's a lot of information sharing that's not, it's not protectionist. But, with the recent changes, there were some changes that happened last year where you're no longer allowed to market the property for more than 3 days without it going on MLS. And so that shut down a lot of vehicles that agents were using to connect with each other. There was a WhatsApp group that shared off-market listings, and I do know that there's a lot of listings that end up selling in the city that are off market. But having an agent that is well connected and willing to share that information specifically within the brokerage, because that is the one exception, right?
Yeah, the exceptions are either, you can market brokerage wide or one-on-one. So having access to, like you said, over 2,000 active agents who are doing a lot of business that's a huge advantage for us as agents, but more importantly for the clients.
And then, within our brokerage, we have multiple Facebook channels that we can go across to be able to really push that product out and say, like, here's what I have. But also to go into a brokerage and have, I would like to connect with the 4 or 5 highest producing brokers or agents at a brokerage because they're more likely to, like they've got the inventory, they're doing the volume. So there are some strategies here, and I think it goes on both sides. Like you've got to educate the buyers and sellers as to what the advantages are, but you also have to have the tools to be able to go out and actually achieve the results that you're talking about. Like if I told a seller that I was going to go out and actively try to find a buyer, I need to actually be able to do that as well.
Yeah. Put in the work, show the value that you can bring to the process for your clients. And like we always say, be proactive, not reactive. Always going to lead to the most success in this business.
Yeah. I actually, I want to get to like the disadvantages, like the things that you need to be aware of, where the pitfalls are. But I also think like with where the market is right now, what we're seeing happening, I think there continues to be a lack of qualities that buyers are looking for, aren't coming out in the volume to fill the need. So looking for these opportunities is like, like where are those listings? Are those people just not sellers?
I think part of it is kind of the overall perception of what's happening in the market, right? A lot of the negative mainstream media stuff that's coming out, sellers think that they've essentially lost value in their house, which which they have, but depending on when they bought, there I think it's a misconception. I think as we're seeing again in the beginning of 2026, like a lot of buyer activity out there, multiple offers. Yes, prices may not be going crazy, but people are still doing quite well on the sale side.
So we've talked about the advantages here. Certainly, the advantages for a buyer finding something off market, I think, outweigh the advantages that would be there for a seller. And I do want to qualify this. Like, I actually think no matter what, 80% of the work is done by MLS. If you're searching for a buyer, 80% of the listings, or 80% of the work is basically the listings showing up on MLS. I think the agent still needs to be very aware of what's coming onto MLS, when it's coming on, how urgent their clients are looking, and being proactive in that approach. I think one of the things that we talked about earlier that I really liked was, this idea of taking, I hate to say, I want to be careful. If I'm working for the buyer, I'm working for the buyer's best interests, right? I think we're clear about that. And if I'm working for the seller, seller's best interests. This is why, I think double ending a deal is bad. But if I'm working for a buyer and I'm dealing with a market like there is today, if something comes on MLS, I want that buyer to see that property as soon as possible. And if they love it, I actually think that there's a huge advantage to them putting in an offer ASAP. But maybe that seller has been reading the headlines of how bad the market is, or how there's, houses are sitting or whatever. And you can actually take advantage of the situation that maybe they've got a little anxiety about listing. And this is why I think it's really important that agents are recognizing, first of all, yes, 80% of the lifting is going to be done by MLS. You still have to pay attention to what's going on in MLS, and be really aware of where your clients are at in terms of their urgency and their timelines to purchase. So that's number one. But there's still that 20%. And that's where I think, like, where the off market stuff comes in. Is, hey, how do I find those properties that aren't on the market yet, or they're holding back?
Yeah. Those leveraging, I think, again, relationships with other realtors within or outside of the brokerage, but within is always great. Yeah, those coming soons, those are huge. Like, we have our weekly office meetings, being there, being engaged, having conversations with, oh, what do you have coming out in the next couple of weeks? And again, that could give you an advantage to get in there right when they listed on MLS. I mean, I think you were talking about an example where you knew something was coming and you were ready and basically got a deal done within hours.
It was in 1 hour.
Yeah.
The deal going live on MLS. That's right. So that's, I think it's important to say, yes, MLS is a really important tool. Our job would be infinitely harder without MLS. From the seller's perspective, disadvantages, quite obvious.
Yeah, I think if you expose the property to the open market, you're obviously going to maximize your exposure and ultimately get the top value for the property.
So this is my devil's advocate. I think this because we talk about this stuff all the time, but I'll share it with the audience. If I was working with an agent and I was selling my house and they presented the idea of selling the property off market, my spidey senses would be tingling. I'd be like, what do you mean? You're going to bring a buyer, and how do I know that I'm not leaving something on the table? To which I would say, why not have your cake and eat it too? If we're going to sell the house, we want to present the best possible version of this house, which means we're at least 10 days to 2 weeks of getting the house ready. So how about during the next 2 weeks, I look for off-market buyers? What if I searched out the people that would be interested in this property, that we introduce people to the property, but we do not make it available until 3 days on the market or something like that, or a week on the market. So that we're doing that lifting ahead of time. We're still looking for the off-market buyer for the property with every intention of listing. So now we're getting, again, I think that 80% of the lifting that's done by Realtor.ca, by MLS, but we are augmenting that with additional work. What we're doing is for the buyers is we're saying we're going to give you first look at the property, and then if the buyer wants to blow the seller's hair back and it never go on the market, well, so be it. How important? Sometimes I like to leave a gap between the next point, but I get going on a roll here because I love this topic. How important is our open houses to finding off market deals, buyers and sellers?
Yeah, I think open houses, rarely does the buyer for that particular property come in. I think it's happened to me maybe once, maybe twice. The open houses are good for people who want to come back maybe for a second visit. I find that's effective. But in all honesty, they're mostly for the agents to meet other potential buyers or sellers.
And so, you know, my take on this, and if I was talking directly to a seller and I wanted to be super honest, which I almost always am by default, I think an agent that habitually works open houses is setting up a pipeline for future deals, for future opportunities. And this is what I think one of the questions that I would have if I was interviewing, I'd say, do you do open houses? So yeah, we can do an open house. And then the question is, how often do you do open houses as part of your marketing strategy for all of your listings, especially if somebody's working in a particular area and are constantly doing open houses. Now, the likelihood of somebody coming into that open house and buying that house is low, but because they've been doing open houses for months or years, they're going to have a stockpiled group of people that are.
And an add-on to that is the way that you maintain your database is very, very important. For example, you know, you do an open house for a semi in East York, and then if you're going to a listing appointment, you already know, because you've had them tagged in your system, you already know how to access those people with a couple clicks, right?
Yeah. And I think, you know, ultimately, if you were to really ask a seller what they want, the answer, when you boil it all down, they want buyers.
Yeah, like for example, like as soon as we get a listing, I go back and I look at every property that is in the same price point, same area. I pull up all those people and then I send them an email as soon as the property's listed. So right away, you're accessing people who have been looking in that for that particular product. So very helpful. Make sure you always keep proper tags and be very organized with your database. Really important.
Yeah. As a little tidbit for something that actually came up, that there was at an office meeting, there was an agent that had a condo that he was selling, listed it for $689. The seller had bought it a couple of years ago. Do you think that sounds like opportunity?
Yeah. Yeah.
It sounds a lot like opportunity. Yeah. Nearly, you know, we're talking about like a 35-40% price difference between that and that. So, you know, just going to the office meetings, and when you hear about these opportunities, I think that's a really great opportunity to now then reach out and share that, because that property hadn't come to the market yet.
Yeah.
You had mentioned the office meetings, and I can't think of like a better place to go to find out about what's coming. And there are lists of properties of like what's coming soon, what's just hit the market.
Yeah.
I know now a lot of stuff is digital, but it used to be to come into the office and it was written down. The coming soon and the new listings were all written down a couple of days in advance.
Buyers absolutely love it. If you're working with a particular buyer in a particular area and you go to the office meeting on Wednesday, the listing's not coming out till next Tuesday. Yeah. You let them know, listen, I know about this property. We can even get in there this weekend and take a peek at it before it even hits the market. Like, again, that's showing your value to those clients.
Yeah. So just as like a bit of a recap, there are positives and negatives to looking for off-market opportunities. I think that at the end of the day, giving people more choice is always a positive. As a seller, like, listen, no buyer is ever going to look at you and say, no way, I don't want to see those off-market. Like, there's no disadvantage that I can think of for buyers. This is the only advantage. Sellers, I think that there's disadvantage there is not exposing the property to the market. And it's going to come down to the seller's own expectations. In my experience, offering off-market sale to a seller is a recipe to not get the listing. But if it's a part of your strategy is to do some pre-list marketing and fuel pre-list buyers for the property, that once it hits the market, you can bring them. Or if it is a situation where they just cannot list the property, they can't put it on the market, either emotionally or physically, there's something that's stopping them from doing this. Being able to have the skills to draw out those buyers using your CRM to its the highest and best capacity, tagging people for specific properties and being able to reach out to them.
and leveraging your relationships with other realtors.
It really can't be overstated.
Yeah.
I think that there's an adversarial approach that some people have to every business. It doesn't matter what business you're in. Like some people are adversarial by nature, but this is actually this is a time where I think that agents can really, shake that off.
And Hallmark, in all honesty, I've always found it such a healthy place to collaborate, and they really promote that within this particular brokerage. Yeah, I've noticed that for sure.
Yeah. I also, I think it's probably a good time to say that, how important it is through all of this stuff is to paper your agreement. So if you're going to work for somebody off market, you need to have that documented so that the buyer or seller, whoever it is that you're representing, understands the terms of this particular relationship. I think that's really important. I see a lot of agents that will talk about an off-market opportunity they have, but they're really not. They haven't locked down that opportunity, and so you do expose. I think you expose risk for all parties when you do that. Like if you've got a seller that's very private and you start sharing that information and you don't have it under contract.
Yeah, and they get people knocking on their door, and the whole reason they're looking for an off-market is to maintain that privacy. It's kind of counterproductive.
I think a lot of agents could do better with documenting their relationships.
Yeah.
I know that it is something that some people are shy when it comes to doing that. I guess it's probably the best way to put it. Yeah, I've been in situations where I've not papered a relationship, and I would feel weird talking about that property.
Yeah.
If I didn't have some sort of documentation protecting the seller, the buyer, and my relationship. So that's it for this week. A little bit of a glimpse into some other ways that you can market yourself to add more value to what it is that you do as a realtor. I think relying on MLS to refresh is a poor strategy because there's been so little good inventory. And you could be waiting months and months and months for the right thing to come along and then find yourself in competition.
Be proactive, don't be reactive. Go above and beyond for your clients. It will significantly improve your business. It's kind of a no-brainer.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks for joining again.
Yeah, for sure.
Podcast number 2. Appreciate it. All right. Thanks, everybody, for listening to this week's episode of Mind Your Real Estate Business. This episode was really geared towards making sure that you're not just relying on MLS, that you're looking for other opportunities, specifically off-market opportunities for your buyers and where the advantages and disadvantages are for sellers. If you'd like to have a deeper conversation about off-market, happy to sit down and have that chat, either by call, email, Zoom call, whatever suits you. Either David or myself are happy to have that chat. Until next week, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on Mind Your Real Estate Business.